Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 State of Anti-Semitism lecture. My name is Rabbi Meir May, and I have had the privilege of serving as the center's executive director for more than 40 years. The annual lecture that we're about to see is generously endowed by Simon Wiesenthal Center trustee, Alan Adler, together with his wife, Frances. And it's been an important yearly fixture in New York City and its cultural scene. Thank you, Alan and Frances, for once again taking the lead in this important discussion. I'm pleased to recognize the Simon Wiesenthal Center's Eastern Director, Michael Cohn, as well as the Communications Department of the Wiesenthal Center for all that they did to make this virtual event happen. Tonight, this lecture is a webinar on Zoom for the first time, and hopefully for the last, and I'm happy to report that more than 900 people registered for this important lecture. I would be remiss, however, if I did not recognize Rabbi David Gelfand and Temple Israel of New York City, who have graciously hosted this annual lecture, and we look forward to returning to Temple Israel next year post-pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will look at the virtual background behind me, you will see the famous Arch of Titus, a Roman icon depicting the victories of Vespasian and his brother Titus in the war in Judea in the years 70 to 71 of the Common Era. Then Jerusalem was sacked and the vast riches of its temple were plundered. The arch shows the victory procession to Rome with the participants carrying the temple's 7-branched candelabra, silver trumpets, and perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant. I'll go out of the way for a moment so you can see it. In short, the arch is the symbol of the Jewish diaspora and the anti-Semitism that enveloped the world before and since. I could think of no more fitting background to offer up for this lecture. I thank my friend Elon Carr, United States Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism, for using the Wiesenthal Center pulpit, this Wiesenthal Center pulpit, for his final speech in that position. His service has been extraordinary and his contributions many. I'm also pleased to welcome my esteemed colleague, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Wiesenthal Center's Associate Dean and Director of our Global Social Action, who will introduce our distinguished guest and who will be moderating the question and answer period following Elon's remarks. I expect this Zoom webinar to last no more than 1 hour. And now please welcome Rabbi Abraham Cooper.
Thank you, Rabbi May, and hello to our international audience from Los Angeles. These are, to say the least, difficult times for us all. I also want to add, on behalf of Rabbi Heyer and myself, our gratitude to Alan and Frances Adler for their incredible leadership, friendship, and support for all these decades. And I know that they'll be very proud to be able to add this unique year, at least so far as the annual lecture on anti-Semitism that is named to honor the memory of Alan's mother. I'll be introducing our speaker, then we'll exchange 2 or 3 follow-up points together. And after that, with the help of our colleagues, we'll be sharing as many of your questions with Elon Carr as time will permit. As you know, dealing with hate, anti-Semitism, especially the history's oldest virus, is a very tough job. The issues, the challenge is never going to go away. This hatred seems to find ways to morph and come up in different formats you'll be hearing about very soon. And we've been blessed throughout these last years, both under Democrat and Republican presidents, with dedicated American Jews who've done tremendous work to stand up and act against anti-Semitism. For the last 2 years, almost to the day, Elon Carr has faced maybe the most daunting and difficult playing field of all, but well suited for the task. He's a person who is a proud Jew from mixed Iraqi Jewish and Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. Some of you may recall learning his name the first time. For those of us who are old enough to remember when US forces took over Saddam's palace, some uppity Jew went and started a Hanukkah celebration and lit the candles at that amazing, incredible moment. Well, someone who's now a JAG Corps officer in the US Army Reserve is an Iraqi war veteran. Elon Carr was the person who, as we say, had the chutzpah and the foresight to have that amazing moment in the Saddam's presidential palace. He's earned his degrees at UC Berkeley, his JD degree from Northwestern University. He's a wonderful wife, Dahlia, physician, and 2 kids. And he has the flexibility and the moxie to confront anti-Semitism, but as we'll learn also, the flexibility to expand his field of vision, not only to deal with the darkness, but as promised in the description of his presentation, a little bit, a slither of light that he had something to do with. So without any further ado, it's my honor to introduce Elon S. Carr for his final official presentation in his role at the United States State Department. Elon?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Cooper, my dear friend, Kavod Rav Cooper. Thank you, Rabbi May. Of course, thank you, Rabbi Heyer, for Rabbi Heyer's remarkable eloquence and leadership, and really for all of your leadership. It's tremendous to be with you, and it's fitting that my final speech in this role should be before you, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and your esteemed audience today. Because throughout my last 2 years, I have had no better partner than the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I've turned to you for your sage counsel, for your expertise, for your political savvy, for your knowledge, your institutional knowledge. Just, one example is Mark Weitzman and how indispensable he's been to me and to our work, lobbying the world on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And so truly the Simon Wiesenthal Center has been a partner, a friend, and you, Rabbi Cooper, certainly have been just tremendous. So my first speech, well, I should say one of my very first speeches after my appointment was at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. And so now my final farewell address, if you will, is with you, and that's fitting. I also want to say, Rabbi Cooper, thank you for mentioning my wife, Dahlia. That's especially appropriate since today is our 15th wedding anniversary. And so, we're celebrating, but also thinking about how our work, combating Jew hatred, protecting the Jewish people, is really about making the world a better place, which is the best gift we can give to each other, to our loved ones, certainly to our children and the next generation. Well, 2 years ago, and it is almost to the day, it was January, I was appointed by the President of the United States and by Secretary of State Pompeo to lead America's fight against this recurring, indefatigable hatred, this human sickness that is anti-Semitism. And I took this appointment at a time when anti-Semitism has been rising, and rising dramatically. It's been rising for about 10 or 15 years now. And it's rising from 3 dramatically different ideological sources. We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism from the far right. These are the ethnic supremacists who really hate everyone, unlike themselves, but Jews most of all. These are the anti-Semites of Pittsburgh and Poway, these mass murderers who've cut Jews down during Shabbat in synagogue. These are the anti-Semites of ominous torchlit marches in Eastern and Central Europe, and even here in the United States, ideologies we thought we had graduated from many decades ago, and yet we see them alive and well, sometimes in a resurgence. These are the anti-Semites of vile internet chat rooms where the monstrous statements of hatred, again, of Jews, but certainly of everyone, is disturbing to the core. These are also the anti-Semites, most recently, of the Capitol building riots. We saw last week during that horrific, despicable assault on our country, we saw among the rioters Camp Auschwitz t-shirts. And we saw an Israeli journalist relentlessly harassed, yelled at, accosted with anti-Semitic slurs. And so we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism from the far right. We're also seeing a rise in anti-Semitism from the radical left. This is the anti-Semitism whose central danger is the widespread acceptance in which it has found itself. Acceptance in polite and sometimes impolite company. This is the anti-Semitism of the campus, of elite intellectual circles, of sometimes left of center political parties. You know, it's you call yourself an anti-Semite and they'll run you out of town. Call yourself an anti-Zionist and you'll get tenure. And that's the danger of the anti-Semitism of the far left. I'll tell you, the Jewish community of the United Kingdom, during the ascendancy of Jeremy Corbyn and his cabal in the UK Labour Party, said that the anti-Semitism of the far left that had taken hold in a major political party in a major country in the world threatened the survival of the Jewish people. This is their words. Not just that it was unpleasant, not just that it was disturbing, that it threatened the survival of the Jewish community in England. And so that is what we're seeing rising in many countries throughout the world. And by the way, what happens on campuses doesn't stay on campuses. One of the most disturbing meetings I've had was with a UK Labour MP who said, let me tell you, this disaster that we have in England, this all started on the campuses. But we did nothing because, well, they were just students. Then it moved into the Labour Party. We did nothing because it was just the far left fringe. And today they won and we lost. And I no longer have a political party I can call home. Now that was thankfully before the election when things changed dramatically in the UK. But the ascendancy of the anti-Semitism of the far left is deeply disturbing and deeply troubling. And lastly, we're seeing anti-Semitism rise from militant Islam. Militant Islam is the chief source of violence against Jews in Western Europe. It's the reason why, after a speech I gave in a Paris synagogue on Erev Shabbat, I was told to take my kippah off as we walked out onto the streets of Paris. It's not safe, a fellow congregant told me. You shouldn't walk around with a kippah. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether that advice is well taken or not, whether it really is dangerous to wear a kippah in Paris or not. That's not for me to say, but I will say that the fact that French Jews feel that they can't be safe wearing a kippah tells you all you need to know about how dangerous this is. And so all of these three ideological camps are contributing to the rise of anti-Semitism, and think of how disparate these camps are. The far right, the radical left, militant Islam, these are three ideological sources who should find no commonality, that one would think would hate each other more than they hate anything else on earth. And yet they're united by their hatred of the Jewish people. And united, interestingly enough, by the tactics they've adopted to spread their venom. Why is it that anti-Semitism has been rising for the past 10, 15 years? It tracks almost precisely the rise in the prominence of the internet and social media in our lives. Great gifts, no question, the internet and social media are great gifts. But every day they are misused by malign actors to spread their venom throughout the world. Now today, a hate monger can, from a darkened room with a simple click, can drive his or her ideology throughout the world with unprecedented speed and global reach. And that's why anti-Semitism has been rising. So now let me tell you what we've done about it. Let me tell you about the policy priorities that have driven my work for the last 2 years, and that I hope and pray will drive the work of the next administration and my successor, because the fight against Jew hatred has got to be a bipartisan fight. Defeating this human disease is just as much in the interest of one party as it is for the other, and should unite all Americans behind the urgent need to combat anti-Semitism. First of all, we have negotiated groundbreaking agreements with foreign governments to combat anti-Semitism together. Let me give you an astounding example. Just 2 months ago, we executed a memorandum of understanding with the Kingdom of Bahrain, the King Hamad Center for Peaceful Coexistence, to fight anti-Semitism together. Now think about it. An Arab entity signing an MOU to work with the Department of State to fight anti-Semitism together. And this MOU specifies that we will work together to combat all forms of anti-Semitism, quote, including anti-Zionism and the delegitimization of the state of Israel. First Arab entity ever to agree to language like that. Now, of course, there's a Simon Wiesenthal connection to this great development, because Rabbi Cooper, you were the Shadchan who brought us together with Bahrain and allowed this MOU to happen, a groundbreaking, transformative agreement that paves the way for other agreements like it. And we are still working on signing other agreements like it, even as we speak. And so this is a tremendous moment. And importantly enough, in that very agreement, it talks about the priority that we both share to develop curricula to teach children throughout the Middle East about tolerance, about coexistence, and more than just tolerance, about true affection for one for the other among peoples and among religions. And so that's one thing that was a priority for us, and that's one thing that we've been able to do. Another thing, I talked about how the internet has been so central to the rise in anti-Semitism. Well, we convened the first ever US government-sponsored conference on combating internet, online anti-Semitism. First of its kind ever. Among the openers were Minister Michael Gove of the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and of course, the convener of the whole conference was Secretary Pompeo. Here too, the Simon Wiesenthal Center played a central role. Rabbi Cooper, you were on the organizing committee. See, there's a theme here that the go-to address to making our world a better place has to involve the Simon Wiesenthal Center. But this conference was widely acclaimed as being a critical step in addressing this tsunami of online hatred that has swept the world. Look, we in America, we don't believe in censorship. We don't believe that even the most vile, despicable speech should be subject to government censorship or government punishment. But just because we hold up the First Amendment as a core American value doesn't mean that we can't do anything about this rise of hatred online. We've got to address it. And that's what this conference was meant to do, to talk about real solutions. And we did talk about real solutions. And in fact, I'm proud to say that our conference has already made a difference. Right after we taped our social media panel, Facebook announced a major change in their policy, that they will regard Holocaust denial or distortion as a manifestation of anti-Semitism. And not only that, but they adopted the very suggestion we made to them in that social media panel in our conference, which was to use their powerful platform to educate their users. And so they adopted our suggestion and announced that they will be referring their users to off-platform sources of information where their users can be educated about the Holocaust and about what happened to those 6 million Jews and about where anti-Semitism can lead. This is a tremendous win just in the first weeks of the conference, and we look forward to more wins. We drove important new policies and played a critical role in crafting those policies on groundbreaking issues, including anti-Zionism. For example, we are the first administration, now it is US policy, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. We've heard for years that, well, anti-Zionism can bleed into anti-Semitism. No. When Secretary Pompeo stood before 18,000 activists at the AIPAC Policy Conference in 2019, he said, let me go on the record. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. a point reiterated over and over again, and that is the policy of the United States. Another critical policy that we played a central role in crafting is that the global BDS campaign is a manifestation of anti-Semitism. Secretary Pompeo stood at the podium with Prime Minister Netanyahu just a couple of months ago, late November, and said, "I'm announcing a change in US policy. The United States will now regard the anti-Israel BDS campaign as a manifestation of anti-Semitism. We're going to call out organizations that do it. We're going to deny US funding to NGOs that traffic in this form of anti-Semitism, because that's what it is. It's a form of anti-Semitism. We've also played a role in crafting important new policies on campus anti-Semitism, because yes, while we have a First Amendment, and yes, while we don't believe in censorship, harassment and discrimination of Jewish students on campus is not protected speech and is unacceptable. And it's happening on far too many campuses. So last December, President Trump issued a game-changing executive order that protects Jewish students, besieged Jewish students on college campuses across the United States. So these are important game-changing initiatives. We also significantly broadened the global consensus on the definition of anti-Semitism. And here's what I mentioned before about Mark Weitzman and how important he's been. You know, you can't confront a threat effectively unless you understand the threat, and that means defining it. And we have a definition, the IRA definition. Our agreement with Bahrain adopts the IRA definition, first Arab entity to do it. And under my tenure, the last 2 years, we have lobbied every single country in the world that hasn't adopted it to adopt it formally. And we've seen tremendous gains in Europe, in Latin America, and yes, in the Muslim world, with Kosovo and Albania adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, a critical component in our fight against anti-Semitism. We've also met with leaders throughout the world to drive US policy and initiatives. Let me give you just one example of an important initiative. That is public safety. You know, if a Jew isn't safe, if a Jewish community isn't protected, there is no quality of life. And so we've asked our allies around the world to devote additional resources to ensure that Jewish communities are safe and protected, so that every Jew in the world can feel like he or her, that he can or she can leave their home and know that they're protected, or put their kids on a bus and send them to school and know those kids are safe. That's been a top priority for us, and we've driven that around the world. Another key initiative of ours is hate crimes prosecution. Now, I'm a former prosecutor. I know how important it is for law enforcement to prosecute hate crimes and make the statement that a crime committed with ethnic or religious hatred as a motive is worse than a crime committed with other motives. And so I met with law enforcement leaders from 7 separate German states to talk about hate crimes prosecution and the importance of intervening early in the life of a hate crimes offender. But it wasn't just overseas that we've done that. I led a delegation of law enforcement leaders and 3 United States congressmen to Jersey City after those horrific massacres to talk about how law enforcement can better enforce hate crimes. I met with leaders in other counties, in Lakewood, New Jersey, and in other places about the importance of hate crimes and how we can, again, intervene and alter the course of a young man. I'm not being gender neutral intentionally here, because it's always males in a young man who's being increasingly radicalized, that we have an opportunity to intervene in that young man's life. And we talked about specific tactics for doing that. And then lastly, an initiative that I regard as fundamentally important to the issue of combating anti-Semitism is philo-Semitism. Look, most of these measures I've outlined are inherently defensive. And you have to, of course, play defense when you're dealing with an onslaught that anti-Semitism represents. But we all know you can't win any war or a battle or even a football game if all you do is play defense. You also have to go on the offense. And so we've launched in multiple countries philo-Semitism initiatives to develop curricula and public material to inculcate an understanding of, an appreciation for, an affection for the Jewish story, the Jewish people, and the contributions of the Jewish people and the values of Judaism to civilization and to every country in which there has been a Jewish community. Look, can you tell the history of the United States without talking about Jewish values that informed our founding fathers and that contribute to defining the American mission even today? Can you tell the history of England or France or Germany or Russia, Poland, without talking about those profound Jewish contributions to those countries? We need to get serious about fighting anti-Semitism, and that means going on the offense against Jew hatred by developing those curricula and that public informational material. And so we worked with Germany on their Philo-Semitism initiative. This year, 2021, Germany is commemorating 1,700 years of Jewish history in Germany. And we worked with our interlocutors in Germany to ask those questions. Well, what's the curriculum? How are we going to ensure that every single German kid in every classroom in every city in Germany knows that it's 1,700 years, and not only that, but knows something about the content of those years? I asked the question, how many German kids know that the vernacular language of Ashkenazi Judaism from Russia to England is a form of German? The answer is not many kids know that. We've got to make sure they know that. And right here in the United States, we launched the Jewish Heritage Initiative last May to capture the potential of Jewish American Heritage Month. What a better time to do that than now, when American values are under attack from so many different camps and so many different places. Now is our chance to discover our American values and the values of Judaism that have been so central in formulating that American narrative that binds us all together as proud Americans. So these are the policies we've been focused on. These are some of the achievements we've been able to post these last 2 years. And again, like I said, I very much hope that my successor and that the next administration will be committed to these important points. Let me conclude now with a little bit of good news, because despite rising anti-Semitism, it's very important that we remember there is a lot of good news out there. Piece of good news number one is that the United States, despite rising anti-Semitism, is still the most philo-Semitic country in the history of the world. All the polls show that to be the case. And the Trump administration has been the most philo-Semitic administration ever. But you know what? President Trump isn't the first philo-Semite to occupy the Oval Office. We've had bipartisan affection for the Jewish people in the state of Israel in our country. And we've got to make sure that continues. No matter who is running our country, we've got to make sure that the American value of philo-Semitism remains a constant in our country. And that means we all have to work together to ensure that. But so far it has, and so far it is. And so that is something to celebrate, because the most powerful country in the history of the world is the most philo-Semitic. And that's not nothing. Second of all, second piece of good news is that the Jewish people do have self-determination. The state of Israel does exist. And Jewish national self-determination is represented by a country that is a beacon of inspiration to the world, a shining example of democracy, of freedom of worship and freedom of press, protected by an army that's world-class yet committed to the rule of law. A font of world-changing innovation the state of Israel is. And Israel's excellence and Israel's strength make the Jewish people stronger everywhere in the world and better able to confront anti-Semitism. And piece of good news number three is that we have great partners in the world, leaders who get it and who understand that the fight against Jew hatred is the fight not only for the Jewish people, but the fight for all of humanity. These are partners that are changing the world. And we could have no better example of a partner like that than the Simon Wiesenthal Center. You represent moral clarity in times of increasing moral confusion. You represent leadership grounded in values at a time when we need values more than ever. And so, like the Simon Wiesenthal Center and so many other NGOs and leaders, foreign leaders who get it and are committed to this cause, you have changed the world. You have made the world a better place. And for my part, over these past 2 years, I have been so deeply proud to be your partner and to stand arm in arm and shoulder to shoulder with you as we truly do tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai. And as we build that better future that our children, that our grandchildren so richly deserve. Thank you so much. Thank you for the great times these last 2 years. And I know we'll always be working together for the causes about which we care so deeply. Thank you.
Thank you, Elon, for your outstanding presentation. Let me raise a couple of issues with you.
Sure.
I know that there are a lot of parents out there, as well as many students. We've got we've mentioned plenty of problems and challenges on campuses across the United States.
Across the world, by the way.
Two of the top universities in the United States, University of Southern California, University of Illinois, made the top 10 anti-Semitism list of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Because of your personal history and also your professional resume, I want to ask you a very pointed question, because a lot of young people get this thrown at them at the beginning of their intellectual and personal developments. You've had it openly and sometimes maybe whispered when you've sat down at meetings. What about the charge of dual loyalty? How does a proud American Jew who also loves Israel deal with the onslaught and the bullying and hatred that often comes with the demonization of Israel? Number one, have you experienced it yourself? And number two, most importantly, how did you deal with it? What would your advice be to younger people who have to confront it?
Well, fantastic questions all. I have dealt with it personally for many years. Even before I was in this role, I served for years as a leader, and eventually I was the international president of AEPI, the Jewish fraternity. And in that role, I led 10,000 students on 180 campuses in 5 countries. And I will tell you that what is going on university campuses is an absolute disgrace. It is unacceptable. I have been told by Jewish students throughout the world, both in my former AEPI role and in my current role as special envoy traveling the world on behalf of the United States, that the price of physical safety, the price of safety that a Jewish student has to pay is divorcing himself or herself completely from any connection to Jewish peoplehood, to Jewish national self-determination, to the state of Israel. Certainly, one can't say the Z word in any favorable way, Zionism. One does so at one's own peril. And it really is, it's peril. It is harassment, it's discrimination, it's vilification. Kids are driven out of office. You mentioned USC. Kids are driven to resign from elected office. Their entitlement to receive funding is questioned. If they're supportive of that aspect of their Jewish identity. So this is very serious and very grave. And the reason why I told that story about that Labor MP who I mean, I have to tell you, my hair stood on end when this MP told me that. When they said, well, this all started on the campuses. And we said, well, it's just kids, we didn't pay much attention to it. And then it moved into the Labor Party and then, almost into 10 Downing Street. Yeah, I mean, this is harrowing stuff. Because look, the campuses is where the future leaders of corporate America, of civil society, and of government, these leaders are being trained there and they're being indoctrinated. Let me tell you a story. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. A kid at a premier, one of the best universities in the world, this is in the United States, but really one of the best in the world, gave me the answer sheet to his math class. And it says, the derivative of so-and-so, such and such, the integral of such and, and then it says, another day in the occupied Palestinian territory, Zionist forces murdering children. And then it goes back to math. Now, the kid who gave this to me, with a voice reflecting utter exhaustion, said, in math class, I can't even escape this in math class. That's right. You can't even escape this in math class, because what is going on campuses is a 24/7 assault on the Jewish people and on Jewish life. And so now, of course, some campuses are fine. It's not everywhere. But on far too many campuses, it's unacceptable. That's why, Rabbi Cooper, that executive order that was issued, again, this shouldn't be about party or about partisanship. This is about policy. This is the good policy to stand up and say, you're, as President Trump said, if you are a university and you're promoting the harassment and discrimination of your Jewish students, we're going to take your money away. That's absolutely, that's a no-brainer. And that's what we've done. And that's what I hope the next administration will do. Now, let me address your question about dual loyalty. This is an old anti-Semitic canard accusing Jews of being disloyal. And I think the Jewish community consistently reacts in the wrong way. The reaction of Jewish leaders is often, no, we have no dual loyalty. I mean, we have no loyalty to anyone else. And the point of it is that the accusations of dual loyalty are really accusing Jews of disloyalty. That's what it really is. We all have competing loyalties. We're loyal to our families. Those of us who are believers are loyal to the Almighty. Those of us who have ethnic lineage might be loyal to our ethnic people. We might be loyal to our faith. By the way, America was built by patriots who were loyal to their kin and to their God and to their faith. And those are the people who built this country. So rather than say, oh no, we're not loyal to anything else other than America, we should stand up and say, you're darn right we're loyal to our people, but we are 100% uncompromisingly loyal to the United States. And those who say Jews have dual loyalties are really what they really mean. Let's really peel away the euphemisms. What they really mean is that we're disloyal to America, that we can't be trusted to be patriots of this country. And that is contemptible. I'm speaking now not only as an administration official, but as a war veteran who served our country in uniform. And I'm also proudly Jewish, and I also support the state of Israel, and there is nothing incompatible about that. And we should stand up and say it and fight, as every interest group in America can fight for their place, their role in American society, and that includes on campuses.
Thank you. And an opportunity again to say thank you for your service. And as someone who's still active in reserves, really amazing, kol hakavod. So yesterday, among all the other craziness that's been going on, the President of the United States signed a piece of legislation that will actually guarantee that your successor, whomever that might be, will have ambassadorship level to their position. They will be an ambassador level. And maybe that is, at least symbolically, showing a slither of bipartisanship where right now, essentially, in our body politic, it doesn't exist. So going forward, with whomever your successor is going to be, what do you expect from the Biden administration with regard to combating anti-Semitism? And also, if you would, when you sit down for coffee with your successor, any points of advice for whomever that person might be? And did you get any from your predecessors?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm glad you mentioned this as an example of bipartisanship. First of all, my office in 2004 was created by an overwhelming bipartisan Congress. Key among the leaders to create my office was Tom Lantos and Chris Smith, opposite sides of the aisle, and also a congressman that you all might have heard of named Congressman from Indiana named Mike Pence. He played an instrumental role as well in creating my office. This was really a bipartisan initiative. Now, this legislation, now law, thanks to President Trump's signature yesterday, or actually, yesterday, I think. This law was passed by the House 411-1. I mean, you don't see numbers like that very often, and it passed the Senate by unanimous consent. And so, really, this is so important because it does make the case that this is a bipartisan fight. That when it comes to protecting the Jewish people and fighting this scourge, this is what it is. It's a scourge that threatens all Americans. That doesn't just threaten Jews, threatens everybody. That this is a fight we all have. And that should be very, very encouraging, because that means that we should expect, not only hope, but really expect the next administration to combat anti-Semitism assiduously. Now, why wouldn't they? When you look at, let's take a moment to reflect on what anti-Semitism is. There's a reason why President Trump always calls it the vile poison of anti-Semitism. That's really what it is, because every society that has imbibed the poison, well, has been destroyed by it. And look at the human wreckage that anti-Semitism creates. I mean, those movements that are defined through anti-Semitism, where anti-Semitism isn't just a footnote, but a core defining feature, well, Nazi Germany, that not only destroyed the Jewish people, but left a continent in ruins. But let's make it contemporary. Which movements today define themselves as a core feature of their ideology through anti-Semitism? Well, Al-Qaeda, the Islamic Republic of Iran, ISIS, Hezbollah. Look at the damage to humanity, the wreckage caused by these organizations. And so I would hope that every administration, and that both our parties, commit themselves with total vigor to this fight. And that means, by the way, fighting all three kinds of anti-Semitism. Look, when you minimize one or another stream of this disease, you really do an injustice to the cause. And so it's critically important that all of us, including those of us right of center, call out anti-Semitism on the right. It's critical that all of us, including those of us left of center, call out anti-Semitism on the left. And certainly all Muslims should be calling out anti-Semitism from militant Islam. Because you know what? When you leave 2/3 or even 1/3 of a tumor untreated, the patient doesn't do well. And so if we're serious about combating Jew hatred, we've got to fight all three flavors of Jew hatred. And as I tell audiences, and as I've told audiences now for 2 years, listen, we all can agree that Jew hatred is bad, right? Who cares? Honestly, who cares what ideological clothing it wears, how it masquerades itself? The fact is, this is evil, and we've got to fight evil.
We have a lot of younger, especially now that I'm on the other side of 70, so almost everyone, but we do have also some of the university students and others watching. Would you urge young American students, American Jewish students as well, to consider going into the Foreign Service to become diplomats on behalf of the United States? And if you can, because you've been so immersed in this, you might think, well, that's what I do every day. You mentioned already examples of what happened when you were in Germany and in France. How does that all get set up? Do you have a local ambassador? Is there anyone at the embassies of our country in each of these countries that are looking at anti-Semitism locally? Could you take us through a little bit of that process?
Sure,
and
sure, that's a great question.
Come back and land up in terms of advice to young students.
Yeah, so great question. So yes, first of all, absolutely, I do advise careers in the Foreign Service. Secretary Pompeo actually was especially aggressive in recruiting. He went to many universities to speak to students about careers in the Foreign Service, because it really is an opportunity to execute U.S. policy, and that's that's a real gift. I'll also, if I can make a plug for my other uniform, I also encourage our young people to serve in the military. It's a gift to put on the uniform of the United States of America and help shoulder the burden of defending this great country. And we need defending. Yes, we're powerful, and yes, America is really a global hegemon. But the fact of the matter is, there are national security threats all the time, everywhere. And if we didn't have a strong military, we wouldn't be able to ensure peace and prosperity here at home. And so, yes, I think all of us should consider careers in government service, whether it's the Foreign Service or the military. And for those of us who don't want to make it a career, then you can always do what I do, and that is the reserve. You can be a reserve soldier or airman or Marine or sailor, and really be a critical part of our infrastructure for national defense. And so that's my plug. In terms of how we do things, so the special envoy has a team. So I have my team. I set it up both geographically and functionally. And so I have an assistant envoy for Europe and Asia. I have one for the Middle East and Latin America. I have one for the internet. Actually, I'm the first special envoy ever to have a dedicated principal team member focused exclusively on internet hatred. It goes to show you the extent to which we have prioritized this. And so that's how I organize it. You know, my successor might organize things differently. And so we have our team, and we participate in a number of things. So some of it is reactive. An incident will happen in some part of the world that we have to address it through a statement, or address it through coordination, or sometimes pressure with a foreign government, or address it through a policy response. So that's reactive. But then we also have, or should have, we certainly did, and I hope anyone in my position would, policy initiatives, long-term sort of tactical or strategic initiatives that you're driving. And that's a very complicated process. You've got to build consensus in the State Department. You've got to craft policy. You've got to get it to the Secretary of State or to the President of the United States. And you've got to make sure that you've got traction. That takes a lot of influence building. And so it's real work. So that's kind of what we've done. Now, when we deal with a foreign country, either proactively or reactively, we always work through our embassy. So I might directly deal with my interlocutors. It might be their ambassador, that country's ambassador in Washington, or ministers, or anti-Semitism coordinators, parliamentarians, sometimes even heads of government. I've met with prime ministers. But in doing that, we always coordinate with our ambassador and the ambassador's team on the ground. And I will tell you that thanks to the unprecedented priority Secretary Pompeo has given to combating anti-Semitism, there is global consensus. I mean, when I needed to work with an embassy, it is 100% yes, we are on this, and I find that our teams on the ground, they work as hard as we do on this issue because they really care about it. They get it, they care about it. And that kind of leadership comes from the top. I mean, that's been the tone of our administration when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, protecting the Jewish people, or supporting the state of Israel. I mean, this is top down and bottom up. It is full court press to achieve this. And so really we've had a remarkable success coordinating across different bureaus and across different State Department assets to get things done. And that's why we've been able to, I went through the list of what we've accomplished. I wouldn't have been able to get that done without my partners and other friends in the State Department who work with me shoulder to shoulder to get it done.
Well, we only have a few more minutes to go. Just a reminder to the audience that we are still taking questions through the Q&A little icon at the bottom of your screens. If you want to send them in, if we don't get to them right now, we promise that we'll share them. As we wait for one or two more questions, if you could just come back and say, what word of advice do you have to your successor? We are at a time not only of fractionated American political culture, but the Jewish community and Jewish organizations themselves are increasingly, it seems, walking away from sense of consensus, even as we see now on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. What role can your successor play in trying to rebuild that sense of unity, at least insofar as the battle against anti-Semitism?
Yeah, well, that's a very easy question to answer. Look, everyone has their different style, right? And my successor will bring their own style to this. I will tell you that for me, helping to craft Jewish unity on these positions was a top priority. It's the lesson of Hanukkah. You can't confront the Hellenic Empire unless you confront the Mityavnim on the inside. You've got to have you've got to have consensus in order to face external threats. Anti-Semitism is an external threat, but if you're fractionalized internally, if you're confused about this internally, and if you've got some people actually spouting anti-Semitism internally, I mean, JVP is an organization that openly traffics in anti-Semitism. I mean, they promote anti-Semitism. So when that happens, it's just very difficult to confront our enemies from the outside. And so, I've made it a point to engage in an aggressive and global public diplomacy campaign to do two things. One is to build Jewish consensus, but the other thing is to lay down the law on how we're going to fight this. That we are not going to minimize any part of the three components of anti-Semitism. We're not going to minimize or ignore any part of the ideological spectrum. We're going to tear down this false distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We will eradicate it. I said that, by the way, in the very first speech I gave after I was appointed. I said, we will tear down this false distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And we're going to talk about how this has got to be a full court press using every tool we have. That public diplomacy campaign aimed, again, at both Jewish consensus and laying down the law on how this fight is going to, how our fight against anti-Semitism will take shape, wasn't easy. It takes work. I mean, I delivered over 180 speeches in my 2 years. That doesn't include my team. By the way, they were on the speaking trail as well. But I personally, 180 speeches to stakeholders throughout the world, to make very clear what the rules have to be on this fight. My advice to my successor would be public, be clear, be morally clear, stand up for principle. Sometimes you might get pushback, and you obviously have to pick your battles, but think about what your red lines are, consider what's important, what is the absolute essential wins that you need in order to move the ball forward, and then don't compromise on those wins. And just be very strategic. I find that what's very difficult is that in this job, you have so many things to deal with. I mean, the whole world is our portfolio, right? So it's the entire globe, and we're so often reacting to things, either events or incidences that happen around the world, and anti-Semitic incidences, or reacting to things internally. I mean, we'll have to drop what we're doing to clear, various things, to craft statements where we might have a little piece of it, but we've got to, it's a deadline, and we've got it. So you're constantly putting out fires and reacting. It can be very, very, very easy to lose the long-term focus. I think this is a problem in leadership across the board, not just in my portfolio. So my advice also to my successor would be, you've got to deal with those issues and you've got to react, but always keep in mind the long-term focus. Reacting to something is very important. It's critical, it's essential, and you might win a battle. You're not going to win a war by reacting to something. Winning the war is about, what is our strategy? What's our long-term strategy? And what are the strategic weapons in that long-term strategy in the war? And you've got to know what your arsenal is, and you've got to know where you want to be. I'll give you a perfect example: is the Philo-Semitism initiative. I mean, this is unprecedented. Nobody's ever done that before, and we've done that because we said, look, if you really want to go for the jugular of what anti-Semitism is, apart from its manifestations, right? What is it? It's an idea. It's a worldview. I would argue a spiritual sickness. And so to go after that, you've got to have the total, complete counter narrative. And you've got to shout from the rooftops what the Jewish people is, what the Hebraic story is, the biblical story, and Jewish values, and how important those are. You've got to be unabashed in shouting that from the rooftops and say, we've got to educate it. And we've had, it's in the beginning phases, but we've had initial successes in this. And so that's just an example of how you've got to know what your arsenal is and where you need to be. And so it's a balance of dealing with the short term, addressing exigencies, as we all must, while at the same time keeping our a prudent, circumspect, long-term focus, moving the ball forward on those key initiatives that will win the war. And I think that if we continue to move the ball forward, if we do continue to push those initiatives, I really am optimistic. By the way, Rabbi, I wouldn't have taken this job if I weren't genuinely optimistic. We can win this. We can roll back this rise in anti-Semitism, and not just contain it, but really roll it back and really promote philo-Semitism. It's absolutely doable. And we're seeing it happen in many parts of the world. I mean, we're seeing philo-Semitism erupt throughout the Arab world. Of all places in the Arab world, we're seeing philo-Semitism be embraced. And the UK, you know, I talked about the fears of the Jewish community. You know, the Labour Party got shellacked in that election, got shellacked. And why? Because ordinary Brits, and exit polls showed this, they said, you know, anti-Semitism is one of the reasons I voted the way I voted. I don't want that for my country. I don't want that for my children. This is, I mean, talk about a win. This is an earthquake. I mean, the fact that ordinary, you know, rank and file voters in a country would consider that a priority for them. And so, you know what, when we stick together and when we remember our long-term goals and strategic initiatives, we can win this fight and we can roll this back. And that's why I was so excited to do this for the past 2 years. And I'm so excited for my successor and the opportunities they will have to really make our world a better place.
Thank you. I have one last question because we kind of asked for it. We're talking about global developments in different countries. Believe it or not, we have a question from someone who's saying, I'm taking the Foreign Service exam February 3rd, consulate track. Any advice for the exam and the oral interview? His second point, or her second point, does it help or hurt to have a point of view when interviewing for the Foreign Service? I'd like to say that I would like to help with the fight against anti-Semitism. Good question.
You know, I wish I had good advice. I mean, you know, I'm a political appointee, not a career diplomat. And so I've never taken the Foreign Service exam. And I don't know. I mean, I would hope that evincing a genuine commitment to making our world a better place and fighting Jew hatred would be a plus. I mean, my goodness, if I were interviewing for prospective diplomats, I want to see people with values, people who are joining the Foreign Service because they're passionate about you know, fighting evil and promoting good, right? That's what we do. That's what America does in the world. And so, you know, I would love to see that. And by the way, not only for parochial reasons, if I were interviewing, I would love to see someone say, you know, I want to fight this or that form of racism in the world. I would love to see that because I think that's, you know, that shows values and a commitment to values. And that's what I think we need in the Foreign Service, but really in all national service for our country. And so I would say, you know, certainly don't hide who you are and what you believe. Be proud, and you know, stand up for values, because that's, you know, that's always got to be the way forward and the path forward.
Thank you, Elon. Thank you for your service to this country and for your love to the Jewish people and dedication to us all. As just a closing comment, you may not have expected this, but on the eve of the Olympic Games in Los Angeles in 1984, the late, great Mayor Tom Bradley and Rabbi Heyer had a press conference with a special guest from Paris, as well as a friend of the Bradley family who was a GI during World War II. A young boy was in Dachau, just a bag of bones. And in April 1945, Dachau was liberated by the United States military. And this now grown man, a famous lawyer from Europe, said, I had never seen a black man before in my life, but the tank stopped and out popped someone who turned out to be a friend of the Bradley family. And he put his arm out from the tank and lifted me up. The name of that boy, that young teen who barely survived, was Samuel Pizar, the great international lawyer, a great friend of the late Simon Wiesenthal, of Rabbi Heyer and myself, a wonderful really power player. He was the stepfather who raised the person on January 20th who enters as the new Secretary of State.
Really?
So we don't have to educate Mr. Blinken about the history of the Shoah or about the values you mentioned. And as someone who had the honor to know and to deal with Secretary Pompeo and his commitment to this issue, I don't know what else might be happening in the future to our country. We pray and hope and work together for the best. But we do have an incoming Secretary of State who has all of those horrible experiences and messages of hope deeply embedded in him by the person who raised him as his father. So
What an amazing story.
the passing of the baton. Thank you so much, Elon, for an amazing session. And we will be sharing with you some additional questions that we didn't have time to deal with in the course of this fast-moving hour. God bless you. God bless the United States. And thank everyone for joining with Alan and Francis Adler for this year's unique annual lecture on the state of anti-Semitism. Thank you and
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Thank you for having me. Farewell, everyone. Thank you.